Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
Hi, I'm Jay Johnson, and today we're going to talk about and I'll demonstrate green sand molding and aluminum sand casting. This is an example of some green sand castings that I have done for the Bemidji Classic Car Club, but this is a license plate ornament that the late Elmer Ream got in 1946, he said. And he brought the original one into Kermit Anderson in the car club, and he said, "Can you make some more of these?" Kermit says, "I can't, but I know a guy that can." These are sand molds. And these sand molds, you'll see me make one, maybe two more of them. They're made in two halves. This sand is not really sand like on a beach. This sand is more like dirt. And this is the way I check it to see if it makes a nice, clean, crisp break. It's important. This sand, each grain will have a binder on it. And this particular sand has a synthetic binder on it. It's activated with oil. A cubic foot of this sand weighs about 100 pounds. This is really heavy stuff. Fortunately, I have Mark Moberg here with me today to give some help lifting that. And maybe he'll leave now that I've said that. This sand casting operation that you see me do today is extremely old. Back into ancient China, they were doing these things. This is not something I developed on my own in this little garage a few years ago. This has been around a long, long time. Now this pattern happens to be on a board. On this pattern and on the castings, you'll see this little system here. This is called a gating system. These are like floodgates that get the metal into this section, which is called the mold cavity. This whole gating system is designed to get clean metal into the mold cavity, and eventually the gating system gets cut off the castings and that whole thing will get remelted. Industry uses these all the time. The other side has little or nothing on it, and this is referred to then as a match plate. Now others that are watching this may know all about these things and they will get just bored to tears. I'm going to pretend like most people don't know anything about this sand casting. Now it's time to make a mold. And I'll step over to the molding bench and we'll discuss some of these other things that I'm going to be using. This is a flask. Some people have a flask that they take when they go ice fishing. It's spelled the same, but it's not. This is a flask, and you'll see that this flask is in two parts. There's a top and a bottom to this, and they go by these names. The top part is called a cope, C-O-P-E. The bottom is called a drag. All molds, sand molds, have to have some parts to them so you can get the pattern out of it. And you'll see me do that with this one. So I'm going to start by putting this detailed side down into the drag half. Like this. And then the cope goes on top. Now we've got the unit assembled with the pattern in between the cope and the drag. Now I'm going to roll it over and do the bottom first. Now before I do that, with sand in there, I'm going to use a dry parting compound. And I don't know exactly what it is. It used to be powdered sand, but the old molders wound up with silicosis. That dust went into their lungs and did not come out. I worked with a guy that had that problem. So I've got that in there now to keep the sand from sticking to that pattern too bad. This is a screen device called a riddle, and I'm going to riddle some sand on that surface to make sure there's no debris or anything else right on the imprint of that sand. I want to put at least a 1/4 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch of riddled sand down on those details so that it's nice and clean. Then I'm going to go around and I'm going to start tucking this sand in with just my fingertips. I want this first layer of riddled sand to go into all parts of that detail. I got to keep this loose now so the next sand sticks to it. Now a tool called a bench rammer. This is going to ram this sand with some impact. It makes this mold really hard. In industry, sometimes this green sand mold can be so hard you can get up and walk on it. Here comes a bottom board. This is just a board that's going to support the mold. This is, you remember, the bottom of the mold. And so it has to be nice and flat, or there's going to be some kinds of problems develop. Okay, here's what I'm looking at now. This is bedded pretty well, and this is sticking up just a little bit above the bottom of the flask, which will be the bottom of the mold. Here comes the hard part. I must roll this whole unit over so I can make the cope, the top part. And I'm going to struggle just a little because I have to keep it all assembled when I do that. And it goes like this. There. Now I'm going to make the top. Part of the gating system is a thing called the sprue. The sprue is a way to get the metal down in, and it's square so that the metal does not swirl, picking up gas as it goes down into the mold. There are other openings in some molds, but they're not square, they're round, and it indicates to whoever's doing the pouring which hole to pour it in, otherwise it might be wrong. Put this thing where it belongs on the top, and I'm going to riddle some sand in there, which will actually form the top half of that casting. I want this to be fairly smooth too. And always these tip over when I'm doing this. No, not yet. I'm going to pack this just a little bit so it doesn't tip over. I've got more sand to put in here. I just want this 1/4 inch to make that surface nice and clean. Now I've got to hold it so it doesn't tip over again. Well, how did I learn about this? I took a course in college that I really enjoyed called Foundry. And I liked it well enough that when I graduated, I applied for a job in the foundry industry. And I got a job at Minneapolis Electric Steel in Columbia Heights. And I worked in that steel foundry for 1.5 years. That's where I really learned a lot from these old guys that have been doing this for years. I would like to get as many molds here as I can because it's kind of expensive to run this furnace. Oh, here's a tool called a slick. This is a foundryman's slick, and it's used for doing cuts and other work in the sand mold. Now I'm going to trim around this sprue to facilitate the pouring of the metal in there and to keep any loose stuff from falling down into the mold. This mold is ready to come apart, and I'm going to loosen this sprue pin really well so I can get it out of there. Then I'm going to use the slick, and I'm going to take some of this loose sand out of here. Drop it right down the sprue hole because that's got to come all apart anyway. That sand will come out when I take this apart. But when I'm all done, then I'm not going to touch this because anything that goes in there gets washed in when I pour the metal, and it makes a defect in the sand. I wish it was almost full, heavy as that gets to be. So far, so good. I'm happy so far. Now, a little trim around here, there might be a little bit of loose sand where the sprue and this plate met, but I don't think so. That looks good. Now, I've got to loosen this pattern just a little bit, and I'm just going to wrap on it to make sure that it's got a little room around the detail where the sand meets it. Let's hope that's it. Now, this is critical. If I'm messy when I do this, it's going to screw up the detail in the mold sand underneath there. So I can feel this with my fingers up against the pin, and then I'm going to make my fingers tell me if it's coming off straight. There it is. This looks good. It's got a little white parting compound on there yet. Nothing has stuck on the pattern. I'm a happy person up to this point. Now the cope, the top half, goes back on here, and the mold will have this detail in it, and sometimes I look to see if there's any loose sand in there. But here's the gating system. The metal will land right there, and it'll go through these little openings into the mold cavity. Now I have to be very careful with this again and hope this doesn't fall out of there, because if it does, I'll have to start all over. I'm going to keep my fingers down where I can feel that pin. That'll help me line up where this thing goes. Very carefully. How am I doing?
You got it.
Now I'm going to move this and put it over in line with those others. I don't want to touch this mold if I can keep my hands away from it, but it gets to be fairly heavy. But I sure am glad I got somebody to help me the rest of the day here. A slip jacket, just in case some metal wants to squirt out on the parting line, just to keep any debris from falling down into the mold cavity. I put these on. You never know what could happen. The fun stuff now, noise and heat. It's really dangerous. We're going to melt metal in this foundry furnace. Now this foundry furnace has a thing in it called a crucible. This crucible is made out of silicon carbide and clay. It is really heat resistant. This thing will be red hot and not lose any of its strength. That's the beauty of this carbon and silicon carbide. Just a piece of paper will keep this from sticking to it. Okay, now let's pick that up. I'm going to turn this. Okay, now I'm going to load it. I'm going to load the crucible. These are parts of another casting, you see. This is a sprue, and this is a riser that we don't have on this one. And I just broke them up with the hammer so they fit into this crucible. That'll hold 16 pounds if I get up this close to the top. And my experience will tell me when it's hot enough. And it'll be really hot. It'll be red hot. And you'll see me with the tool. I'll pull some of the dross, the oxides and stuff, away from the crucible. And if the line is still black, the crucible's drawing heat out of it yet. But when it gets really hot, there won't be any dark line there. The metal and the crucible will both be kind of red. I'd say 1500. This will be 1500 degrees. This furnace will put out about 2,500 degrees. It's not enough for brass or cast iron. Pretty much it's for aluminum. Okay, a little gas and a little start. Watch it now. The best material for melting will be pistons. These pistons are made out of an aluminum alloy known as Dural, durable aluminum, that has aluminum, copper, and silicon. See how that's starting to collapse? It's not liquid, but it's starting to fall apart. That means it's 700 degrees at least. I also am very careful not to put anything in the liquid metal that has any moisture on it. You get steam immediately and you'll see metal go all the way to the ceiling in here. Unless your face is in the way, then it only stops there. So it's got to be really dry. Now you'll see how dark the crucible is. It's still drawing heat out of the aluminum. See that dark line there? When that dark line starts to disappear, it means the metal is getting just about ready. This is an ingot mold that I made. This is going to be for any extra metal that I have. We'll make ingots out of it. Just weld up some angle iron. But I'll start pouring there. When I get down here, if there's any left, I'll pour it in there. Piston rings coming out. If I don't pour it hot enough, all that work is wasted. The mold cavity may only fill halfway, so I start all over again with those molds. I don't like to do that. Oh, it's hot now. The metal is as hot as the crucible now, and I'd say it's close to 1,500, which is what I'm looking for. That's going to be ready to pour in just a little while. Oh, there must still be some steel in there. It's really heavy. Some of those plates I didn't get out, I bet. Oh, see it split?
Yeah.
They won't all do that, I hope. Once you start pouring, you pour it hard so it doesn't fool around on its way to the mold cavity.
Originally from here.
See, you can see this one over here. Scott, look how it's leaked out between the halves there. Not good. Is there anybody else we could blame besides me?
Oh, me? I was standing here.
All right.
I'll take.
Okay. Well, let's blame Mo.
Yeah, this is neat stuff.
I never get sick of this. I need to let these molds cool for a little while now so that the metal in the mold is sure to get cooler than 700 degrees or it'll fall apart when I start taking the mold apart. But I don't want to leave it too long so it burns the heck out of the sand. It's kind of a delicate balance here. But they're getting ready to come apart right now. Okay.
You're removing the
Slip jackets. See, it did come out a little bit of the parting line. It wasn't supposed to do that. I'm going to carry these over there and take them apart.
well, that's still hot, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll take it apart carefully so it cools. Isn't that excellent? It's a defect. But some will just saw this off anyway, both sides. Then they'll put a screw head right through these diamonds. And it fits right on the door someplace to the outhouse or wherever they want it. So I'm not too discouraged about that. Okay, so here's the product we're looking for. This one turned out just fine. It's nice and shiny, and the slots are all open. That's good. A little bit of fin around the horn on Babe's antler there, horn I guess it is. But I'd say this one is as good as I can do. We had a little issue with some of the others, but this is coming out all right. Now I can clamp this in the vise here and then snap this part off. So it'll break right there and there and there and there. And then I usually sand these with my disc sander on the surface just to clean up the high spots here without damaging the surface on Paul or Babe. So a little on the sander will make them look much better.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.